Certainly Member Burns.
Here.
Member Danley.
Here.
Member Miller.
Here.
Member Murray.
Here.
Member Russell.
Here.
Chair Peters.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. First agenda is non-agenda items and visitors' public comment time. If there's anyone who wants to approach the committee on an issue that's not before the committee tonight, please stand up. We'll swear you in and we'll listen to your comments. Seeing none, we'll go on to agenda item number 3, consideration of the April 17, 2019 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Have we all had an opportunity to review those minutes?
Yeah.
Any proposed changes?
I have a question.
Certainly.
Page 3, mid-page, under Member Miller. What's an open florist?
That's a good question.
How about just florist?
You got it.
Any other proposed revisions? One comment, page 1, second paragraph, line 3, when we were commending Sam on his extensive contributions, I think we should change bought to brought.
Yes.
If it were Chicago, it might be bought, but it's Lake Bluff. Okay, could we have a motion, please,
Motion
to approve?
to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Okay, anyone who would like to testify tonight, I'd like to have you stand and we'll swear you in if you could, please.
Yes.
Right. Okay, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, please be seated. All right, agenda item number 5, a public hearing for 910 Sherwood Drive, Quest Performance LLC. Mr. Cole, if you want to present an overview, please.
Certainly. So the applicant, Marquand Edwins, is here with us tonight. The space in question, Quest Performance LLC, is a fitness facility over 500 square feet. So as you might remember, here at the start of last year, this group made a distinction between spaces smaller than 500 square feet for this activity, which could proceed without a special use permit, but for spaces larger, this group still wanted to see those as a special use. So in this case, Quest Performance Training has actually started operations in the village already. In the process of obtaining the permits they would otherwise need to obtain lawfully, it was discovered that they needed to have a special use permit, so we don't think there's any ill will or malfeasance on their part. But again, we have some standards here as far as the standards for special use, nothing I would say unusual. It's a relatively small space by percentage in a multi-tenant building in an area that, as we lay out on page 2, does have a few of these type of facilities already. So
What is this space, square footage?
square footage.
It's about 1,600, isn't it?
Probably thereabouts. I know I've got a copy of the lease here I can grab real quick. Here, we can just do a little bit of math. Yeah, I've got about 1,300 square feet.
All right. Mr. Edmonds? Yes, if you'd like to stand over here and, if you could state your name and your business address for the record, please?
Marquand Edmonds, 910 Sherwood Drive, Unit
Okay.
22.
And you're the petitioner?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why don't we adopt and incorporate by reference the standards for special use permits that the petitioner submitted? That'll maybe make it a little more efficient. If you could, just give us a brief overview of the operation and the relief you're seeking.
Yes, sir. So I've opened a business of personal training, essentially, where I work with a lot of clients one-on-one. Most of these clients are either going through rehab or just your daily activity or obesity. So I operate on a appointment-only basis, so it's not like a walk-in facility. Everyone is already on my schedule and operating from Monday through Saturday.
And then I'll just ask you a couple questions, and then we'll get started with the commissioners. How many days per week do you operate?
6.
And what are the hours of operation?
So Monday through Friday varies between 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then Saturday, there's a 3-hour gap between between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m.
And then how many employees currently?
Just one, just myself.
Oh, just yourself.
Yes, sir.
And how many clients on average per day?
Per day, 9 clients.
9?
Yes, sir.
All right. Why don't we start with Mr. Burns?
You know, I don't have too many questions, to be honest. I think it's a very low impact type of business that shouldn't have parking issues, considering you're doing one-on-one. Don't have to worry about a lot of staff parking. I guess the only thing was, do you foresee in the future doing group classes or having more employees where it would be a potentially larger burden?
With permission, the only way I would have an employee is if I was allowed to allow someone to rent space to train their own clients. And as far as group, I've wanted to offer if someone couldn't afford the one-on-one rate, if they wanted to share with a family member, so I would work with two to 3 people at a time, with permission, of course.
Okay. Further questions?
Thank you. Ms. Danley?
Well, I've already noticed that, we have granted, special use permits and very similar situations. We have Body Fix near you. I think there's also another one in the building,
Yes.
very similar to what you're doing and giving back to the community and making us all feel a little better.
That's the goal.
Right? And, I think sometimes we need to give businesses a good starting point without all these extra expenditures and things like that we are doing. I know you are seeking something far larger square footage than what we're saying is required, in our current state. But I have no objection. I really don't have any questions at the time, but.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller?
I too agree with the other 2 members that this is what we would call a slam dunk, or what you would call a slam dunk. I guess my question is to the committee is our restrictions, are restrictions too tight? Should we amend, well, and I don't know if this is for this discussion or a future discussion, but should we amend the special use / permitted use to include larger spaces, maybe include 1 to 2 trainers in a space or 3 trainers in a space as a permitted use, rather than having these small practices, these small facilities coming before us with the costs? Is that something for discussion now or the future?
So as far as taking action tonight, you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a text amendment. Or-
Yeah, so typically, when we've been bringing these lately, we've done, procedurally, we've given you the option of doing a text amendment along with it. In this case, because you talked about it about a year ago, we didn't put that out there. But we certainly, if there's a desire to look at it again, we can put it on the list or make sure that no matter what, we're giving you both options when we hear these type of requests going forward.
Because as I said, the last time we met about having these easy businesses come before us ahead of time, so we can clear the business before they have to go through the cost and expense of special use permits.
Yeah.
Just, so legally speaking, there's nothing that precludes you from, if you want to engage in a discussion about text amendments and policy, you can have as long and as hearty discussion as you would like tonight. It's just a matter of you can't take final action. So if you decide, and you would desire to have the discussion about what would a text amendment look like, you can do everything except vote on it. And then if you want to move forward with a text amendment, You would have to go through the process of having it noticed up, put on an agenda, just like any other type of text amendment, and it would have to come back to you for official action. But you are free to discuss as much or as little as you like.
Do we conduct that discussion during the pendency of the petition, or can we do it after the 3 petitions have been concluded?
That is your prerogative as the chair to decide when it's appropriate. Yeah.
Okay, I would not be opposed to addressing it after agenda item number 8. We could have a discussion and at least come up with some groundwork, if that's the consensus. All right. We'll do that. We'll go through your petition, Mr. Edmonds, and then later in the evening, we'll discuss it amongst ourselves, whether we can avoid this type of petition going forward. So, anything else, Member Miller?
No, that's all.
Member Murray?
I don't have any questions for the petitioner, and I agree with Member Miller that it seems like we've granted a large number of variations, and these are exactly the kind of businesses that we want along the Waukegan corridors. So it feels like we've set the threshold too low, and it might be nearing an unreasonable burden on new business creation to have that limit. So look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Member Russell?
I concur with Member Murray's comments.
Okay. I don't have any other questions for you, Mr. Edmonds. Is there a motion, please?
Motion to recommend approval?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Any- Yeah. Does anybody else have any comments or questions regarding this petition? Okay. Could we have a vote, please?
Certainly. All right, the order is random. Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Danley,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Murray,
Aye.
Member Burns,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Edmonds.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item number 6, public hearing for 407 East Prospect Avenue. Mr. Cole, if you could give us an overview.
I'm sorry, just for the applicant's benefit, it may have sounded like he needed to stay around for the end of the meeting, and that wasn't the intention at all, so maybe you want to, you're free to go, because we've recommended approval of your item.
Yeah,
To appear
we're
at-
good to go.
You have to appear before the village council.
You can go.
You're all set.
Have a good evening.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Sure. So before I get into the memo, I'd like to draw your attention to a few things that are here at the dais in front of you, communications we received regarding this petition between when the packet was issued Friday night and today. So you have, very generally speaking, we have some concerns being expressed about the survey from Stephanie Bjork, who's near this property. Those concerns are discussed in the memo. I'll discuss those in a bit. You have the survey that we included in the packet. The surveyor in question was, I believe, contacted by Ms. Bjork to make some clarifications to the survey that are discussed in there. We have a letter of support from a neighboring property as well, or not a direct neighbor perhaps, but someone in the vicinity as well. So just want to make sure everyone was aware of that at the dais and had a chance to see that. Now, as far as the subject, the item in question goes, 407 East Prospect Avenue, this is a request to protrude into the front setback a bit to construct an unenclosed sheltered porch. So there's some drawings that show no screens, railings, solid pieces, just columns and a porch that goes somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.5 feet out. There's some technical issues with that and we'll come back to, but probably easiest to punch through sort of the quirks of this, and then we'll allow the applicant to present. So the first thing to be aware of, the applicant has previously received relief for this structure. Back in the 90s, had some zoning relief to construct less than 100 square foot addition kind of behind the garage. That variation included in your packet. So this structure as it is over bulk. The second thing to note is the survey that was provided in your packet doesn't show this 100 square foot odd variation. The variation packet does, so that's in there. Again, because it's not related directly to the relief, we didn't seek a new survey at the time. That's something perhaps we'll discuss as the night goes on. The biggest thing to note is this can proceed with only a front yard setback variation because porches of a certain size are exempt from our floor area rules. And so the applicant has set the size of the porch precisely at that limit, which is acceptable. The issue is, as drawn, the porch would go an extra foot to foot and a half beyond the line of the columns supporting the roof. And so from our reading in the code, you wouldn't be able to do that and exclude that area from floor area. So that all either needs to come back or only a step of a certain width could protrude any farther. Depending on how we go there, the variation recommended may change a bit, but it's still essentially the same work, which is a porch in the setback. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that, or we can get into the applicant's presentation.
All right. Sir, if you could state your name and professional address for the record, please.
My name is Scott Stradiff. Address is 555 Oakwood, Lake Forest. I had a PowerPoint presentation tonight, but I'm not sure that we're set up for that.
We can get you set up for that. So there's a cable
you.
right there at your feet we can
Okay.
get you taken care of with. Do you have a laptop by any chance? Or I can...
No, I just had a...
Here, I'm happy to lend you mine for a moment.
Otherwise, I can...
That's all right.
You can just imagine the photos if...
In your mind's eye.
Yeah.
I'm good. Nothing like
Is
showing
your
off
computer
my...
okay?
Yeah, we're good. Got to show off my... Oh, actually, yeah, we got here right there. Got to show off my physical prowess, at every
You did.
PCZBA meeting. I didn't ask for legal advice.
How about a medical device?
Hold on with two hands.
You might stumble and fall.
That would only add to the comedy.
Maybe while you're getting set up, I notice we have a guest in the audience tonight, a young man from the Boy Scout or Cub Scout troop. If you'd like to state your name for the record, and if you want to sit in the front row, that's fine with us.
These as a slideshow, you know.
These pictures?
I think there's, let's see.
Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts? Okay, part of your civic merit badge? Is it part of your civic merit badge? Good for you.
Now, we should mention that young Master Burns is currently engaged in his Eagle Scout project, which is to construct some planters over at the community church. He was in front of the village board just on Monday.
Maybe we'll just...
Good for him.
Older brother,
Older brother,
Oh,
okay.
oopsie.
Master Dylan Burns.
The resemblance is just so striking, Mr. Burns. I apologize.
Let me see.
It's okay.
Well, great. No,
Gavin will be there someday.
another couple years.
I was gonna say, everyone looks young to me, I guess. Goodness, I'm getting...
See if I can,
It's like that kid looks like he's dropped a half a foot since I saw him.
There you go.
like it's got a slideshow option.
Have you all ever heard the one about how many government employees it takes to start a presentation? That's at my expense, not yours, Mr. Stradiff.
Usually there's a slideshow option, but I don't see it on this computer.
Yeah. Maybe you had the right idea. How odd. I apologize, I'm not sure you're going to hear the punchline to my joke tonight. If we want to just,
Just do extra large icons and I'll sort it that way.
yeah. That is bizarre, I apologize. There we go.
All right, we're just gonna have to wing it here, I guess. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. My name is Scott Stradiff, and I will be presenting this petition tonight on behalf of the owners, Edward and Elizabeth Duffy. The primary intent of this petition is to request a zoning variance to the existing front yard setback line to allow for an open porch addition to the existing residence located at 407 East Prospect. The existing front yard setback line is 20 feet. The petitioner is requesting relief of 7 feet to allow for this single-story open porch. The proposed project, at least as it pertains to the porch, shall conform to all other zoning, building scale, and FAR ordinances set forth by the Village of Lake Bluff. To acquaint you with the neighborhood, I'm going to show you a few photos of street views of the surrounding area. This section of Prospect is characterized by a moderately wooded streetscape with a variety of architectural styles and home sizes. Several of the homes along this section of Prospect have open porches extending beyond the front yard setback, including some of the original camp meeting houses. And here are a few examples of those homes, starting a little bit closer to the lake down at Sunrise, or closer to Sunrise, and working to the west. I'm not sure if you guys can see these, but many of these homes have gracious front porches that extend within 20 to 25 feet of the sidewalk. I just highlighted a number of examples here. This is on the north side of or on the south side of the street, relatively new construction with a pretty gracious open front porch.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask questions as the presentation continues?
Certainly.
That one example that you just gave, how far is that porch from the front setback?
I don't have the specific dimension of
Did it
these
need a
houses.
variation?
It did not need a variation. Or you're asking me if it needed a
Yeah,
variation?
that's what
I don't know.
Because these are clearly houses with porches. I guess the question is, are they houses with porches that needed variations?
Many of them are just existing non-conforming. In fact, I think there's even a,
Well, that, number 8, though, I know that house very well, as does member Danley.
It's my neighbor.
It's your neighbor. And I don't think it needed a variation, but I don't know. So,
Isn't that 617?
yep.
Yeah, that, That was granted a variation in 2013 for a 7-foot 3-inch
3 inch,
extension
that's the question I was asking. That's
into
wonderful.
the 7-foot 3-inch extension for a covered front porch, very similar to what the applicant's asking for. It's almost the identical same
Okay.
request.
That's the question that I was asking.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. That's a great example.
There's two examples here.
Okay, and then here are a few photos of the existing home, which was built in 1929, number 12, 13, and 14. There are a few areas around the front entry where snow and ice accumulate, so the proposed plan will help address some of these issues and alleviate the concern. There's a couple of downspouts that are also discharging and creating sort of an icy situation, so this will help with that concern. Number 15 here, which is really hard to see, this is the drawing of the plan and elevations of the proposed porch. Porch will extend, as I said, 7.5 feet beyond the facade of the house, which is just under 7 feet beyond the front yard setback line. The owners have addressed the following standards for variations put forth by the Village of Lake Bluff. Unique physical condition. This is a unique physical condition given that the property lines for homes along this section of Prospect Avenue are positioned in the center of the front yard rather than more characteristically at the sidewalk. This is due to the fact that the row width dimension along Prospect is significantly wider than other streets in Lake Bluff at 100 feet wide. There are only a few streets that have this extra wide row width, including Center Avenue. If the variation were granted, the front porch would still be 33.4 feet off of the pedestrian sidewalk and approximately 53 feet off of the street. This request will not offer the owners a special privilege that other like property owners do not enjoy. There have been, as discussed, a number of variations granted along Prospect to allow for this type of open porch. This is an enhancement that is normally looked favorably upon in Lake Bluff as it creates a characteristic that is consistent with the historic fabric of our community. The owners are not requesting expansion of any internal living space on their home, but rather a space to welcome guests and passersby. The covered roof also provides an element of safety for snow, ice, and inclement weather. The request will not adversely impact the surrounding properties. The purpose of the request will enhance the neighborhood character and increase property values. The request will not impair the public health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding neighborhood. It will, in fact, provide an element of safety for the property owners. The proposed design will not adversely impact the neighborhood character. The proposed design exemplifies an understated historic character and uses high-quality traditional materials and details. The owners have reviewed the petition with the surrounding neighbors and have their support on the proposed improvements. For these reasons, we would like to request that this petition be approved. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you. Any further testimony before the commissioners begin to question the petitioner? Hearing none. Mr. Russell?
I don't have any additional questions, but just several comments about why I'm going to vote in favor of this. Because of all the extensive discussion about whether or not this 20-foot vacated strip really had any restrictions or not, I went up to the county courthouse today, being a retired guy, and pulled the original vacation document from 1928. And interestingly enough, the ordinance vacating this actually had an extra clarifying sentence that said, the intent of this ordinance being to have the said 20-foot strip of land become a part of the adjoining lots in the block, described in section 1 hereof. So there's no question that since 1928, this 20-foot strip along Prospect and the whole older core, this has all been considered part of the lots. No question, in my mind.
So what does that mean as far as the petitioner?
One of the neighbors was conjecturing that there was some restriction on this 20-foot, and we therefore should not allow it. The neighbor actually has their covered front porch completely in the same 20-foot strip. Okay. Apparently didn't realize it at the onset of the correspondence. Back in 2013, is the rendering that Member Murray questioned 617 East Prospect, the LBPCZBA recommended and the village board approved a covered front porch across the entire front of a home, almost identical to this request. After the 2013 discussion, the PCZBA, followed by the village board, changed the zoning regulations to actually encourage
Right.
front porches, open front porches, not built-in closed front porches. So that's now part of the regulations, and it's why there's no change in the floor area calculation for this type of request. In this particular block where this home is located, there are 7 interior lots on both sides of the street, so not counting the corner lots, which have different rules that apply. Every one of the other homes on the interior lots, a part of the home extends into the 20-foot. The Duffys actually have the only house on the block right now that doesn't extend into the 20-foot, just as a matter of perspective, with the exception of some low steps, which they all have. But several of the homes actually have literally parts of the house that extend up to 10 feet into the same location. So this particular lot is one of a very, very small number of lots in the village that only has 100-foot depth. So it is a very, very shallow lot. So there's hardly any backyard to begin with. It's also located on one of the only 100-foot right-of-ways in the village, so there's all this extra space to begin with relative to every other location in the village. So for all of these reasons, I'm going to vote in favor of the request.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Murray?
I think most of the questions that I asked have been addressed by my colleague to my left. So I think, Mr. Chairman, it seems like there's plenty of precedent for granting this exception. I think the most overwhelming thing I've heard, George, is the comment about every other interior home on the block already protruding into that space. I think that is, to me at least, the dispositive kind of point that says this isn't an exception, this is allowing them the same opportunity to improve, the edifice of the home that we've granted over time to every other property on the block. So it seems consistent with purpose and keeping with precedent, so I wouldn't see a reason to object, provided that I believe there is some conversation to come about potential conditions that the staff recommended. So I'd reserve the right to comment on some of those potential conditions down the road.
Yeah, maybe. Thank you, Member Murray. If we could, Mr. Cole, maybe address that condition issue before Member Miller provides us with his comments.
Certainly. So again, the condition issue is just made to address sort of this narrow technical issue with floor area ratio. The structure already over floor area ratio, so we would say that without giving them a variation for that, you wouldn't be able to add any further to it. At the time of the application, that wasn't specified, so we didn't put that in our notice, so we can't grant it tonight. So the porch that they've dimensioned is the maximum amount of a porch that you can exclude, and so that extra 18 inches or so they have drawn that would go beyond the column, our interpretation is you could not do that. So you could take it away entirely, or you can narrow it to a step. A step doesn't count towards floor area, so that's fine. But it can only be so wide as, I believe it's 5.5 feet
Yep, that's what you
is the
said.
number that's used elsewhere. So again, just made to avoid that technical issue.
So on that point, Mr. Chairman, I'd be inclined to support it with the recommendation at 5'5" that the staff has suggested.
5.5-foot step. Okay. Member Miller?
I think everything that has been said, I agree with, and I have no further questions to ask the petitioner.
Thank you. Member Danley?
Now, we keep using the word charm and character and what porches bring to our community and how we be able to, have those conversations and connective fabric that we all want, right? And yet we're having this hardship because we have a bridle path that was dated far beyond that we're riding horses anymore. And I live on Prospect. I'm surrounded by 2 homes that were photographed today. And I have no hardship looking out and seeing a porch that's open and children playing and conversations happening. And I think I find living on Prospect a hardship that we have that bridle path that's not allowing something that we want to add character to our community. And front porches are what we all speak of. And again, that was something that was encouraged in previous meetings here at the PCZBA. So I would encourage us to continue this conversation and really make changes moving forward on not having this hardship for other petitioners coming forward. So I think this should be open for more discussion on this. And I know the Prospect's not the only street that has something like this if you live here, but we want to encourage homes to do this, especially older homes. There should be some exceptions, but character and charm, that's what we're looking for. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Danley. Member Burns?
Excuse me, I also agree with the other commissioners. I think it meets the standards of variation, in particular the right-of-way width and the precedent. And I think it's going to be a very nice addition for the petitioner and also to the neighbors and the community. I also agree that this seems, and I think we can't go through every single area to look at whether things should be adjusted, but in this case, where there is something that seems to be, hardship for that area, we should consider, again, trying to make it easier for people to make positive improvements that help their house and those around them.
Thank you, Member Burns. I just had a couple questions for you, Mr. Strader. For whatever reason, maybe I didn't see it, but if you could just discuss the design of the porch for me. Or was there a excerpt in the?
Blocked out.
Yeah, so it
There's
was
elevations.
in your packet before the slide that says existing property, it's printed here in portrait. So it goes the end of Mr. Strader's letter, then the plot plan, and then there's the elevation on the back.
Oh, so it looks like there would be 4 columns?
That's correct. Four columns. The goal is to really keep it quite simplistic and understated and not take away too much from the architecture of the house. So really just very simple square columns and a square entablature, a standing seam roof, and likely just a 7 by 7 or 8 by 8 square column that comes down to a composite decking.
And then we had a brief discussion regarding that 5.5 foot step issue or potential condition. What are your thoughts or what are your comments?
I think we have one step drawn between the 2 columns to the left. I don't see a problem limiting that to 5.5, or is it 5 feet or 5.5 feet?
5.5.
I don't see a problem with that. That would be okay.
And then no, you're not contemplating at some point building it out for year-round use? I mean, the
That
intent
is
is
not
to
the
remain
intention
open.
of the property owner, no. Just-
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further discussion among the commissioners? Could we have a motion, please?
Motion to approve?
Your recommending body on
Okay.
this one.
On this one, I couldn't remember. Motion to recommend approval
Second.
With
with the condition that the step be 5.5 feet.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Could we have a vote, please?
Certainly, again, the order is random. Member Burns?
Aye.
Member Miller?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Member Murray?
Aye.
Member Danley?
Aye.
Chair Peters?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Going so smoothly.
All right. Agenda item number 7, a public hearing for 224 East Center Avenue. Mr. Cole, if you could give the group an overview, please.
Certainly. So the last substantial petition for the night, 224 East Center Avenue, Mr. and Mrs. Harry and Louis Nickel. So what they're proposing to do here is, right now they have two decks sort of along the eastern and south edges of their house, two separate decks. They're proposing to replace those, to remove those, to replace that with a bluestone patio paver, and then with an addition behind the garage. And as part of that addition, which will expand their kitchen, they would then need to move the AC condenser in that area. They're proposing to the other side of the lot, and just because of the width in that area, there's only, they can't, part of the condenser would be within their area as of right, but part of it would intrude on the side yard setback. So the bluestone work could be done as of right. The addition requires a 4-area ratio variation, and then the AC condenser would require a side yard setback variation. Now, Member Miller did reach out to me this morning asking about stormwater issues in this area. So we hadn't noted any in our initial staff review. The village is in the last steps of a stormwater study right now. That's looking at possible improvements village-wide. So we did contact our consultant there. That information is at the dais for you as well. Essentially, there's some concern about perhaps the bluestone patio impeding overland flow that we think could be taken care of through the normal construction process. No concern that the addition would necessarily impede any drainage or cause any further drainage issues. So there's a diagram, and the email chain is printed out for you on the dais. As one last note, just to make sure we're all on the same page, so the architect submitted a plot plan that we believe more or less shows the building as it exists today. The survey, as you may have been able to tell, was relatively dated back in the 90s. So the decks were put on since that time. They're proposed for removal as part of this work. Again, we think that plot plan is a relatively accurate depiction. The only place that it varies perhaps is there's additional driveway space to the east. It's paved roughly halfway towards the garage as sort of a second car pull-in. There are photos of that in the packet, and again, no concerns as far as the area of impervious surface here. So just those two variations. So happy to answer any questions.
Are they gonna put one of those tanks underground? Because it's new construction, those retention tanks?
Our thinking on this is there's not a whole lot of renovation going on. It's really just pushing out the addition. So we ordinarily, we don't think this would be enough work to quite want that.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah.
If the petitioner could approach the lectern, please.
Good evening. My name is Harry Nickel. I live at 224 East Center Avenue. I'm here with my wife Lois, right there, and our architect Bob Gebelhoff, who's been working with us on this project. We purchased our home here in 2012, so we're relatively newcomers to the community. We moved in 2013. We love living in Lake Bluff. We love the community. We love our location within the community. We have wonderful neighbors. For the most part, we really love our house. We've lived here now, as we've lived here, we've become aware of a few concerns about the house that related to basically the kitchen area and storage. And this proposed project addresses those issues that we've had with the house. And I'd just like to take a moment to share with you why we're interested in doing this. And we're very grateful for the opportunity to be able to be here this evening to talk to you about this and seek your approval so that we can move forward with the project. First, the kitchen. We have two issues with the kitchen. The first has to do with how people flow through the house. What we've discovered is that the way to get from our front door to the backyard goes right through the kitchen, and the way to get from the front door into the family room, which is directly west of the kitchen, also goes right through the kitchen. And the way our kitchen is now, this causes a problem for a couple of reasons. There's a fairly small door going from a hallway into the kitchen. And then once you're in the kitchen, we don't know why anyone ever decided to design the kitchen exactly this way, but there's a cabinet along the wall, and then there's a peninsula that goes out from the other wall, and the dishwasher, the opening to the dishwasher, the lid of it opens right into that passageway. So the passageway goes from 3 feet down to about 6 inches if we ever have to do anything with the dishwasher. So, so that's a part of the issue, and it's also the case that the kitchen is relatively small, so that when we have more than 2 or 3 people trying to work in the kitchen, it's very cumbersome. But the result of all this is that when people come to our house, when we have a fairly large extended family, they come fairly often. We like to have other people in our home, our friends and neighbors and so on. Whenever we have more than a few people in the house, the kitchen just gets very, very congested and doesn't seem very hospitable. So what our solution for this is to put basically a 6 foot wide addition onto the side of our kitchen, which will then go out to the east and make an addition that's about 17 feet by 6 feet, adds about a little over 100 square feet to the kitchen, about 60%, makes the kitchen about 60% larger, and we're also going to create a wider doorway into the kitchen, and wider walkways through it. So, then we also have some issues with storage. We need storage for lawnmower, for snow blowers, for bicycles and such, gardening equipment. Currently, we have a shed on the far north end of our property, of the lot. The shed is in very poor condition. It's been getting worse by the year as it has a plywood floor and gets water up through it. It's not in good condition at all. So our proposal, we will tear down that shed, and then we'll build a storage area, which essentially will go between the new addition to the kitchen and the current garage. So it just kind of fills up the space between the kitchen and the garage. I think you can all see that on the drawings that you have. So this will it'll actually create a better and more convenient storage area for the home than the shed that's in the back now. So the first variance that we need to request is related to this addition. As shown in the material that you have, the addition will increase the amount by which we exceed the allowable square footage. You have the numbers in front of you. So the second variance is requested because the addition will be built over where our current outside air conditioning unit is. So we will need to move that, and our proposal is to move it to the other side of the house, because there we can put it behind a fence that we have that separates our front yard from the backyard, and also our neighbor has a high solid fence so it'll be kind of tucked in to a corner back there. It's an area that we really don't use very much. We could conceivably put it on the east side of the house, but if we did, it would need to go in the area where we use the primary walkway from the front of the house to the back. I think the variance is 5 foot is what's allowable, and I think this will take it to around 4 feet instead of the 5. Again, we thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm here. I'm happy to answer questions. Bob is here. He's happy to answer questions, and Lois is also here. So anything you have, we'll be happy to talk about. Thank you.
Maybe if you could, Mr. Nichols, just go through the standards for variation for us, please.
The standards for variation have, I think that's, do you want to address that, Bob, or you? I mean, yeah, it's right here on the front. I think that on your packet, we have existing 2577 square feet. This would take us to 2749, and we're allowed 2500. I think is that what you're referring to, Mr. Peters?
Yes, well, we've got practical difficulty or hardship.
5 points here.
Oh,
1, 2, 3, 4,
oh, I
5.
see, I see. Okay, this is in the application. Well, I think so this is what you want me to talk about, this, what's on the application?
Correct.
Okay. Well, the hardship has simply to do with the fact that the kitchen just gets to be very congested, very difficult to host people in our home. So that's our essentially our reason for that. I didn't know anything about unique physical condition. The special privilege, I would see that being essentially the same answer as number one. The number four, we're tucking this, the addition will go between the kitchen, or the addition to the kitchen and the shed will go right behind the present kitchen and behind the garage, so it really won't be, it's not even visible from the street, I think. You could see it if you walk back that way, but it won't obstruct anything. You really won't be able to see it. And then the air conditioning unit will be a little bit more than 4 feet from the property line rather than 5 feet. There is a fence there. There's a fence it'll be kind of surrounded by the house and 2 fences. We do have put a letter in the packet from our neighbor on the west that would be impacted by that, and they didn't see that to be a particular problem. And then number 5, I don't see that it really will impact the supply of light on adjacent properties in particular. Nor do it seems it would be any concern related to public health and safety. That's, I don't know that I can answer those any more completely or differently than that.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start with Member Russell.
Caught me off guard there.
Well, we got to keep you, now that you're retired, we want to keep you alert.
First twice in a row.
Start in the middle. Next time.
Have you talked to the homeowners to your east? I mean, to the east where the addition is going, and did they have any comments?
We have not talked to them about this. We would have. They have been gone for the last 4 or 5 months, and they came home just last Friday, and then they were gone until Monday, so we really haven't had a chance to talk with them about it. No.
But they would have received the notice, right?
That's
Glenn?
correct.
Sure. Okay. And you did say that the shed is not going to go back? Right now, the proposed plan has the shed there in
No,
the middle, but it
no,
is going to be open.
We will
open
remove
space.
the shed that's there now and leave it removed. We will not put it back.
Okay.
Yeah. We're really kind of anxious to have a little more room for gardening back there in the back. That's one reason to remove the shed also.
And then, just to clarify, the patio isn't being considered here, so we're not approving the patio.
No.
But I do have a question. Do you have some idea of how large the patio is going to be compared to the footprint of the existing deck?
I think we've talked about that. I think we've talked about it would be no bigger than, I think maybe less than is what we've discussed, but that's something in all likelihood, we're not going to do that. We probably will do that next year rather than this year. Do you have a better answer for that, Lois?
Lois Nickel, I'm also at 224. So I think when you look at the square footage of the shed and then the deck along the side of the house as well as behind the house, the patio will be certainly smaller than all of those structures combined.
You're not, and understand you're not committed to that. You'll still have to follow the village
Right, I know.
rules
We'll
when
have
you
to get a
apply,
permit and-
apply
sure.
for that permit. I was
Yeah.
just curious in
Right.
terms of the context of the overall intention of the final plan.
Yeah, we're not looking to take up the whole backyard because we really like green space.
And the only other point that I was pondering, the placement of the air conditioner closer to the property line than what's allowed, and granted, it's only 1.5 feet closer than what is allowed. And your neighbors are being very gracious, saying, no problem, but that is their only open side yard when I look at the footprint from the sky. If they're in their backyard, they're right over the fence there. Would you be willing to commit to adding some sort of vegetation along the portion of that property line near the air conditioner to lower that decibel level
Soften it,
by
sure.
5%, and to make that a condition of the approval for the AC question, that
Sure.
some sort of vegetation be added along, because right now there's nothing, at least in the pictures, the bare wood fence. And if narrow arborvitaes or something in the area of the air conditioner,
Sure.
that
Yes.
would be my
Yeah,
thought.
okay.
So other than that, no comments, no
Thank
further
you.
comments.
Thank you.
Member Murray?
I think George has hit on 2 out of the 3 items that I had. I think it's great that you've had the conversation around air conditioners. Air conditioners do not make great neighbors. And so I think, being willing to take reasonable steps to provide noise abatement for your neighbor, particularly on, those warm summer nights when this could become, a source of frustration to them is smart, and it's great that you've already started that conversation with them. The bigger question that I had was around the stormwater abatement. And, if I understand it correctly, we're not approving or recommending for approval the actual patio itself tonight?
That's correct.
Okay, so I would only observe that, given the focus on stormwater abatement, try to make sure that everyone is appropriately focused on that particular point. But otherwise, it seems pretty straightforward.
I would note that, based on our consultant's review today, we didn't get into the specific detail, but the overland flow path among this block of properties does basically go through where this shed is. So I have to think removing that
Further
shed
back
is.
than where the patio is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that starts to come up to the patio. If the patio's graded to flat, it'll interfere with that, but I have to think that removing that shed from that path could never be a negative.
Could actually help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could I ask a question? Is that out of order?
Oh, that's fine.
I was just learned about the stormwater flow path today. Will that be, when we want to put in our patio, will that be a variance or will that be a permit?
So that would just be a permit. So
Okay,
you've got
that's
you've got the impervious surface to spare already. You'll just be putting in a permit, presumably to take down the deck if you haven't already, and to construct this. There just might be some work between you and the village engineer on
Sure.
grading to make sure that that flow is respected. And that's mostly, anecdotally, from our consultant, that's probably mostly to your benefit. Our thinking is, if there's interference in the flow there, you're probably the first property that'll feel it. So
Okay.
I think he mentioned that you've had a flooding issue there at least once. Is that right?
When we first moved in 6 years ago, we used to have ponding in the back, but we haven't had anything in probably the last 5 years.
Okay.
So,
We think some things that our neighbor on the west did to their property helped us in that
they
regard.
sunk the gutters go into the ground, the drainage. So it doesn't flow as much onto our property. Does that make sense? I don't know what those are called.
Somebody else?
No,
You got it.
pardon me?
Does not pertain to you.
Very good.
Those are the only questions I have.
Good, thank you, Member Murray. Member Miller?
I commend you on your plans. I think that's a great idea what you're doing, and totally
Thank you.
for it. My only concern was the flooding issue, and that's a non-issue, so I have nothing else to add.
Thank you.
Member Danley?
My question was, did you review any other locations for the air conditioning unit? And I think clearly you mentioned it in your summary, that the visibility and noise were always an issue, and that the letter from the neighbor was always so reassuring to hear that as well. Vegetation will certainly add to buffer it as best you can, and I
Sure.
think it's a great addition, and I really don't have any other comments other than it was all answered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Burns?
I agree with most of the other comments, or I'd say I do agree with the other comments, but I do have one concern that I think goes beyond, again, a little bit of the scope, and that is I'm a little challenged with meeting the standards for the variation, in particular the practical difficulty or hardship or unique physical condition. And I think there could be many other applicants that could come and provide the same sort of difficulty just due to layout of their house. And inconveniences that they don't particularly like about it, that really are, in fact, that would provide, special privilege to them because there's nothing in particular that's special about it. What I think I am able to use to rationalize this case is the age of the house. And this came up with some other applications in the past for which we have been more lenient. And I think it really should be discussed at another time. How the history, the historical significance of a house could potentially play into the definition of the standards to the extent that that is legally possible and reasonable and what have you, but I know that that's a big value in our community, and I think it's something that we do consider. And so in this case, I do look at that as a hardship. It wasn't stated by the applicant, but in my own mind, I do, because things were laid out differently, and I think in this case, the addition will improve the house. I don't think it increases this big visual bulk for the community, so I think it's a good addition. But I would like to, I wasn't necessarily satisfied with the text here, but I think I can rationalize for myself that it meets the standards in that light.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Schuster, at some point, should we have a little discussion regarding that, whether or not there is any impact? Is it proper now, or is it more appropriate at a later date? Looking at the age of...
Yeah, I think I think that might be something that we can talk about at a later date in terms of we can present to you and I can work with staff to kind of give you some options and ideas and kind of the legal framework of what you can and can't consider and how you might go about possibly looking at your, amending your standards to kind of put that in. Now, that said, I think in terms of this particular application, obviously, I think it's a matter of the standards are what they are before you, and I think that as you think about them, I think the code purpose and some of these other provisions do contemplate some of these factors. So I think in this particular case, I think you might be able to work it in there, and then, going forward, a greater conversation, and staff and I can present, as I said, present to you kind of a more comprehensive analysis.
Okay. Yeah, I think the board would appreciate that and would benefit from that. So whenever that works out from a scheduling perspective. Thank you. Just a couple questions from my perspective, Mr. Nichols. The storage area now is obviously going to be enclosed, but it's not going to be winterized, so to speak. Is that correct?
Right.
That's correct.
And then access will be from somewhere on the side?
There's a door on the east side of the storage room.
Okay. And you're not contemplating at some point in time building that into a year-round space, so to speak?
I've not thought about that at all.
No.
Okay. I usually take a pretty conservative approach toward floor area and variances and things like that. I take a pretty conservative approach toward bulk and the perception of bulk and things like that. I think the fact that the storage area is not contemplated to ever be used as traditional living space is a positive from your perspective. I think the fact that the deck is being removed and the proposed addition will be tucked in behind the garage, so there's not going to be any visual impact virtually, except maybe a little bit to the east. And the question I had, and I think Commissioner Burns raised it, was, is this a special privilege? And I'm not sure it warrants any further discussion, but it just was a general concern that I had when I was working through the paperwork. because you are theoretically a little bit over bulk if the petition is granted. No further comment from my perspective. Any other comments from the commissioners or any
I have
other?
one request. Before this is granted, I'd like to see the neighbors on the east side give you their blessing before we go ahead and do this. At least have a discussion with them and see if there's a major objection before we approve this.
Okay.
I just think they should be forewarned. If they've been out of town, maybe they did not receive any messages or warnings. I just think it's fair and proper.
But didn't they receive it? I mean,
They've been out of town.
what's the procedure? I mean, they received information even if they were out of town.
Well, could we ask the petitioner, have you spoken
No,
to?
they haven't spoken to me.
You said you hadn't, but why not? I mean, what efforts have been made? What conversations have you had?
We didn't, we started this process in the fall, and they live in Florida from about October to, they just returned early this week?
I think
Or
they-
late last
Friday-
week.
I think Friday or Saturday of last weekend they returned.
Yeah.
There's no reason, I mean, we don't have a problem talking with
I
them.
mean, we get
just
along
really
fine
haven't-
with them.
I understand that. I just think,
Yeah.
since they haven't, whether they received the information or not, at least get some acknowledgement, it can be verbal, and get back to Glenn here with that.
We
I
can
just think
speak with
it's-
them tomorrow, they'll probably be there.
Can we approve subject to no objection from a neighbor? Or can we?
Well, I think we have to be, the one thing I'd be careful is their objection would not necessarily be reason to deny. So certainly if you believe that, in order to get a better sense of whether the standards are met, you want to gather more evidence, that's absolutely fine. And they may or may not have concerns, and those concerns may or may not be valid. So I think that, I don't think that you can defer to them saying that your approval is conditioned upon their approval, but you can, if you do think you need more time to allow some additional information to come into evidence, that is your prerogative.
Is it possible to state that if there's no objections,
So one recommendation that you could do is, this is a recommend, you're a recommending body. It is going to go to the village board for approval, and that your recommendation is that all efforts be made to seek input from the neighbor prior to the village board meeting. And then whether it's, an additional letter that can be placed into the packet for the village board, or a comment from staff in their staff report about efforts were made to no avail, or vice versa. We've talked to the neighbor and they're fine with it, but that would allow it to proceed. And then based on that feedback, the village board could take that into consideration, whatever it may be. So it's your prerogative, again, if you want to continue it another month, and that way to allow more time, or if you want to do it with the village board.
I like your proposal.
Okay.
So are we ready for a motion?
Well, we talked, Member Russell raised the issue, actually, there'll be two motions, I believe. Member Russell raised the issue with respect to the arborvitae, and I think Member Murray also raised it, making sure that there's some foliage, presumably arborvitae or some other foliage that'll reduce the potential sound effect from the neighbor to the west. And one other condition that I'm contemplating with respect to the main structure would be that the storage space be prevented from being winterized or used as inhabitable living space. And I think we can incorporate that condition into the motion on the kitchen area. Any further discussion?
Well, I guess the clarification is, winterized or habitable space, they may not be the one and the same.
Okay.
So if you don't want it winterized at all, that's absolutely fine. If it, but, you know, some people do heat a shed for storage purposes, but would not be permitted to live in it. So I think, Mr. Mentor, I would just ask for your motion, whenever it's made, is just to clarify precisely what the condition is, so that way, when we draft it up, we know precisely what you all would recommend.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the condition would be that it not be used for habitable space.
A different alternative perhaps would be, if this matches your intent, just that the access only be from the exterior. That would, that doesn't, I don't think the plans show access from inside the house.
Yeah.
So, do that.
Yeah, that the space not be habitable and that access be limited to the exterior, or from the exterior.
I think so.
Do we have a motion, please? And like I said, there'll be two separate motions. Do we have a motion with respect to the proposed expansion of the kitchen area?
I'll make that motion with the addendums that we stated.
Is there a second?
Second.
And so the motion basically will be for recommending approval, subject to the condition that, number one, access to the storage facility will be only from the outside and it will be not habitable. And the second condition is that the neighbor to the east be consulted and approve. Is that correct?
And third was the landscaping.
But that's for the second one, right?
That'll
That's
be the
around the air
second motion.
conditioners,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
the second.
Okay,
motion.
got it.
Okay, and we have a second.
Second.
Okay, vote please.
Certainly, once again, the order is random. Member Danley?
So wait a minute, I mean, I'll say aye for all of it. I'm just not sure I'm in favor of waiting for the neighbor. I don't think that's something I think they need to have time. Are we saying wait for the neighbor for 1 or 2 days, or are they gonna have to go through more
No,
time
we said it was
waiting
going to
for
go to the
this?
village board, and then the village board makes the decision, the
Yeah.
ultimate decision.
Right, with the way it was, I think, framed
It's not
was.
like they have a hardship of
No.
waiting another month or time on
No,
their end.
the idea was that prior to the village board, they shall make efforts to contact the neighbor and, you know, to give them an opportunity to provide any additional
Okay.
I'd say reasonable efforts. I mean,
Reasonable, yeah.
They live right next door. You know,
Okay,
Yeah.
Not to hold
And-
them up, just
No.
to.
Just, yeah, the old college try.
then yes, aye.
All right. Thank you for the clarity.
Was that an aye vote?
That's an aye,
Okay.
thank you.
Member Murray?
Aye.
Member Burns?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Member Miller? Chair Peters?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Second motion, do we have a motion that addresses the requested variance with respect to the west side and the air conditioner?
Move we recommend, subject to the use of foliage to provide further abatement of the noise to the neighbor on the east.
Okay. Do we have a second, please?
Second.
Okay, vote. Any further discussion? If not, do we have a vote, please?
Certainly, once again, random. Member Miller?
Aye.
Member Burns?
Aye.
Member Murray?
Aye.
Member Danley?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Chair Peters?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Just one word, one clarification. Will it be satisfactory if we get a letter from our neighbor and give that to Glenn Cole before, in the next week or so? Does that,
Very much so. That'd be excellent.
okay. Thank you very much.
And if they don't want to provide a letter, the other thing they could do is make a phone call to staff, and staff can incorporate their comments, if
Okay.
any, into a memo.
Thank you. Did I give you some of my papers?
So that was the paper I loaned you?
Oh.
Remember to read the.
Thank you.
Okay, agenda item number 8, a public hearing for 101 Waukegan Road. Mr. Cole, if you want to give us a brief overview and then continue it to June 19th?
Certainly. So 101 Waukegan Road is looking to expand their parking out into that rear 50 feet of the Waukegan Road setback. A change this group made when we were looking at a redevelopment of the Smedco building late last year. So as you know, that development didn't go through, but that change still remains in effect. So they are looking to make they are looking potentially at needing 2 variations in conjunction to that. The first is they previously received a variation to go closer on the non-Waukegan Road side of their corner property. So they would extend that line, which would require variation to be that close. And the second would be just to relocate a smoking shelter into an area that's right on the front yard setback. So that petition went to the Architectural Board of Review first, and the ABR has requested some amendments that are fairly substantial, not negative per se, but potentially eliminating some of the parking that would require a variation and adjusting the shape of a swale and some landscape proposed, so enough that the petitioner did not want to come and present prematurely tonight. So we would ask, to avoid having to issue notice again, we'd ask that we continue the hearing to the PCZBA's next regular meeting. That'd be a voice vote.
Okay. Yep. If you want to call the vote?
Still need a motion and a second.
Move to continue to the next meeting.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Yeah, you could call the vote, please. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Certainly. So next item, we're going to have it to you first thing in the morning. The village has been working on a sustainability plan with our Sustainability and Community Enhancement Ad Hoc Group. There's a couple last little changes we're doing, but I'm happy to share that with you for your review and your comments and your thoughts perhaps on how this relates to some of the work this body's doing. So the sort of the roadmap that I think the group has in mind is doing some public outreach on that plan over the next 3 weeks or so, and then looking potentially at a recommendation to the village board on June 3rd. So we're still sanding down one or two last edges. We'll have that circulated digitally to you tomorrow morning. If you'd like a paper copy, just reply back and we'll have one sent over to you.
Thank you. Before we get into the commissioner's report, we should maybe address the fitness facilities in L1 and have that general discussion on special use or what the criteria will be. Current regulation is, I guess, 500 square feet.
I think, yes, I was thinking about this, and I thought maybe we should break it down into a fitness facility like the gentleman was, and all the other people who've come forth, versus a health club. I think there's really, that's the big difference. We don't want a health club without some kind of oversight, in my mind. But a fitness facility for, what do we call it? It's
Personal training.
personal training, really should be permitted use. I don't see why we have to go through this again.
Yeah, it's almost an office space. It's 2 people meeting. Now they're doing relatively physical things, but couldn't be any less of a burden. I mean, from any kind of utilities perspective, I mean, you're talking about 2 people or maybe 3 people in a building at one time.
500 square feet, I mean, I don't move around a whole lot, but 500 square feet is a pretty small workout space. And if you're doing CrossFit or any kind of personal training,
Yeah, you need
it's way too small.
It
It
does
just
seem
seems like
like-
an arbitrary number.
Right. Doesn't it seem like in the previous minutes, though, it was a concern of noise or a concern of, the cars and the traffic, but, that clearly is not taking place in a personal training. I mean, Body Fix is there.
Right.
He has a large,
I don't know, did it ever come before us, Body Fix?
I don't,
I mean, that's a huge, not huge, it's a large space.
right.
I'm surprised it hadn't come before us.
I suspect, I'd have to look into that a little bit. I suspect one of the special use permits you've granted before probably is that space under a different name. So for example,
We've
I
had to
think,
do many of them, like 3 or 4 in the past 18 months.
Maybe, but I don't think
They
so.
come
I mean, it's possible. I don't remember that, but, because that's the
So-
dermatology office, the back of the dermatology office.
yeah, I'd have to look.
I think it snuck in under the,
I mean, I think the question is really for the staff, which is, can the staff prepare for a future meeting, an item, and at that time, we can kind of review the size of in square feet, the already permitted, fitness facilities in the village. And if we can, using that data, attempt to draw a more appropriate line in terms of the threshold for having to come before this body for approval. Because you can make it permitted use within a certain size, which starts to address your point about you don't want, LA Fitness, right? But, and I don't mean to pick on LA Fitness, I mean a large operator of a health club.
Why not?
But, a studio, a Pilates studio, where you're gonna have one-on-one or, one-on-two instruction, it doesn't seem to pose a traffic issue or a noise issue or any of those things. I don't know if that's something we can request from the staff and put it on the agenda for a discussion.
Yeah, happy
future
to prepare that for you. Shouldn't take too long to walk you through.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I agree. One of the consideration, even though it's fairly low impact, low physical impact. I take that back. I just shouldn't say anything. But sometimes yoga studios, they can pack a lot of people in. And so it could be tricky to try to frame this up. And in a very small space, you can get 30 people. And I'm not worried about the noise or anything like that, but parking becomes an issue and potentially traffic as they're all arriving at one time. So it's not the same as, a big health club, but it could be a relatively small space and have a ton of people in there at one time. So a consideration. So maybe it's a combination of space and intended number of people, under 10 or something like that. Because I'm okay, even if the applicant today would have said, yeah, I plan to have groups of 6, well, that's fine. But if you said 20, well, it's just a different consideration, okay, what's the parking plan and how are you going to deal with this? But something to consider, because even yoga can pack a lot of people in a small area. So, I don't know, you guys are the experts in framing something like that up.
Well, I will tell you that an old town I used to work for had such a yoga studio as that. It was very small, they had hot yoga, they jammed 40 people in there, and then they'd get out and about half of them would go to the protein shake place, the other half would go to the Chinese food place. So great for business.
I'm not saying it's a bad
Not great
thing,
for
just needs to be
results.
considered.
Yeah.
So they can definitely be a good thing.
Yeah, those are all excellent points. The greater concern that I have is traffic generally, volume of customers or client base. But Glenn, if you and the team can put together an overview and maybe a proposal, we can discuss it next month or the month after and keep the momentum.
Certainly.
Yeah, doesn't this kind of tie in with the whole discussion we had last month anyway about trying to put together a slam dunk list of those, given the current tenor of our board anyway, of low impact activities out there, like the floral business of changing that. And I know we decided to back off because of the comp plan thing, but I do feel bad for the applicants that have to pay these fees, and we're all saying, well, of course we should allow this, and maybe we should try and have staff work on that slam dunk list if it doesn't impact the comp plan too much.
Yeah, I mean, if the idea is,
At least the ones we've granted variations for in the last couple of years, those types of uses, that there seemed to be this consensus across the board at our board and the village board level that, yeah, we should be allowing these, and whatever those are, just add them to the permitted use list, so we don't need to tax a future business that way with time and money just to get in the door.
And uncertainty.
Yeah.
Uncertainty being, something
Gotta be approved,
we've
right.
seen in the past might drive you to a different location outside the village.
So if I'm hearing the group right between last month and this month, it sounds like, for sure, in this particular case, we want to talk more about health clubs. And I suspect we might have a more general discussion about maybe if there's a threshold between small and large of some of these uses. But it sounds like by and large, if it's allowed downtown, or if we've been giving out a number of special use permits for it, there's an interest in seeing it become a permitted use in L1, at least in our making a discussion list.
Yep.
I think that should be fairly simple to provide you with that list. Yeah, we can give you a discussion item next month and talk through it.
Like what you said about population or density of people at any particular time, I think maybe we can use that as a threshold rather than size.
Yeah.
of the facility. I kind of like that. Whatever we think is reasonable, 10 or 8 or whatever it may be.
Great. Commissioners' report. Agenda item number 10.
No, I forgot to tell us what's happening next time besides Waukegan Road.
Right now, we know Waukegan Road's all we know about. So stay tuned if there's anything else cooking out there.
Did you see Roanoke is looking into Mundelein to build a subdivision?
Don't think I heard that one.
Yeah, they're buying land from the diocese at Mundelein.
Oh, really?
And there's some opposition to that. I read that in the newspaper.
Interesting. Well, I know there's still litigation afoot with their Libertyville, I believe, project with the Archdiocese as
Oh,
well.
no, isn't it Mundelein? Is it Libertyville? That's what I'm thinking about.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Maybe.
same.
Maybe it's not Libertyville. Could be Libertyville. You're probably right.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about. And should we do a Sam Badger? What's going on with?
There is no news on Block 3. There is no news on the Stonebridge development. So, thank you, Sam Badger.
The ghost.
Do we have a replacement yet?
Not that I know of.
Any other issues for discussion? Agenda item number 11, adjournment. Is there a motion?
Sure. Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Very efficient
Meeting's
meeting.
concluded.
So this many,
Got through 6.